Welcome. I'm Rick Bucher. That is Bostjan, Boki, Nachbar. Thanks for joining us here on Fullcourt Passport. We got a lot to dive into. If you didn't see it, you can find our first episode from last week. This is episode 2. We're going to continue to introduce everybody to EuroLeague basketball, all the insight, particularly that Bostjan has, and the connection between EuroLeague and the NBA and the international players that are starring in both places and who is coming up. So with all of that, I introduce you to Boki Nachbar. Boki, good to see you again, my friend.
Good to see you too, Rick.
And congratulations, by the way. For those who don't know, Boki is no longer the most accomplished or the athlete in the family that everybody's keeping an eye on. It's Tara or Tara?
Tara. Yeah.
Tara Nachbar at the Western Reserve Academy. Am I allowed to give away where she's at?
Yeah, of course.
I don't want the paparazzi waiting outside of her.
I don't think we're there yet.
Okay. But we are where she received her first collegiate offer from the University of Akron Zips just around the corner. So congratulations, Boki.
Yeah, thanks. It's been an exciting week, actually. I mean, it started with the University of Akron, and then it followed actually with a couple of other universities, including Michigan State, Ohio State, and now
Nice.
University of South Florida. So it's it's exciting, But like you said it right, I'm no longer the main guy when it comes to basketball in our family. Tara is right now. We have Ida, the little one, coming up as well. So
Okay.
A lot of basketball ahead of us,
Very nice. Well, congrats. I am at the tail end, more of the tail end of that. As people can probably tell, I'm in a hotel room. I'm in upstate New York where my son plays football. Had a game yesterday. First win of the year.
Congrats.
He had a great game. So excited about that. And my daughter's playing collegiate basketball down in Southern California. So that'll give us some fodder as well, because as we've talked about when we were putting this together, like the collegiate basketball scene is changing, and a lot of that change is impacting EuroLeague and the clubs overseas, and we'll get into all the details and the how and why of that. So, but I want to start with, and this is really your wheelhouse, which is kind of laying out for people just the European basketball scene for the American fans who have sort of had an idea, who followed it when Team USA is playing, but and know maybe some of the big clubs, but really kind of laying the groundwork for the countries that are at the forefront right now of basketball, and the clubs within those countries that are leading the way and are the teams that are probably going to be vying for the EuroLeague championship.
Yeah, I mean, let's say the European basketball landscape is as fragmented as you can imagine. I mean, it's so many different countries that have such a good high-level basketball and basketball history and basketball upbringing, basketball school, whatever you want to call it. And a lot of times I when I speak to my friends in the States, they say, hey, but where does Jokic come from? Like, where does, what kind of basketball school or Luka or Giannis or so on and so on. And it is true, like a lot of these guys, especially this generation that is dominating or playing extremely well from the Europeans that are in the NBA, they didn't play college basketball. That might change in the future, since a lot of European young players are now going to play college. But previous generation, not so much. And it's so many different players coming from so many different places. I mean, you have on one hand, Spain, which has been really dominant for, I want to say, 2 decades or so in European club basketball, right? Like strongest league, teams like FC Barcelona, Real Madrid, and so on and so on. Luka came through that system, right? Luka played in Real Madrid youth program and then played for their pro team, got drafted, and now he's in the NBA. France is another country that is continuously bringing up a lot of talent. Every year, players get drafted really high, and there's a couple of teams in EuroLeague, whether it's Paris, whether it's Asvel from Lyon, which is Tony Parker's team, And if you want to count Monaco also as well as a team that plays in the French league otherwise, but also competes in EuroLeague. Serbia, obviously a powerhouse, right? I mean, so many great players come through that. And it's no coincidence that they have two of really tough historic team, Partizan and Red Star in Belgrade, and so on and so on. You have Greece with two amazing teams. You have Turkey with two amazing teams in EuroLeague. So the list goes on, and all these. The setup is a lot different than what you guys are used to in the States, where you have this high school system and then AAU and then collegiate system, and then you get drafted. Like in Europe, we have clubs. And clubs are basically institutions that are outside of kids' schools, outside of an elementary school, outside of high school. They're not connected usually in any kind of way. So,
right.
It's almost like to describe a day of a kid, like he'll go to school in the morning, finish around 1, 2, 3 p.m., whatever, come home, eat something, do homework, and then he'll go to the club to play basketball, right? And these clubs have all these youth programs. So all the teams I mentioned before, they all have youth programs that kids go play under 12, under 13, under 15, 16, whatever, until some of them are good enough to get a chance to play in the pros. And that's how the teams are basically set up here. That's why you see a lot of times some of these young players who play in the NBA and people will ask them, hey, when did you turn pro? And they're going to say, well, when I was 15, 16, 17, which is kind of unheard of for you guys, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I think.
But it's pro in a different way. Like we think pro and you're immediately playing for the top team. And that's not necessarily the case with a 15 or 16-year-old. It may be it's like the farm club. It's more like drafting high school kids to go into baseball or whatever.
Yeah, it's rare, right? Because for a young kid to play EuroLeague game, like Luka was one of those guys that got a chance to play really early on, and in the past,
Ricky Rubio too, right?
Yeah, Ricky did, and so on and so on. So, I actually played my first EuroLeague game at age 17. So that's, and that's rare, right? Like it's so much pressure and there's so much involved in the EuroLeague that coaches usually don't give chances to young. They can't risk it, right? The result is too important. Yeah. And that's why there are other teams in the league, in the domestic league, that are not chasing titles, but they're, competing. They want to obviously remain in the first division, but there's some room for them to give a chance for a young player to play for a couple of reasons. One, just because, he might be their player and he's good enough to help them. But number two, also, what's the next step for that young kid? Well, to be basically to be transferred, to go to a different team, whether it's a bigger team in Europe or the NBA. And in all those cases, most likely the team will receive a compensation, financial compensation, right? So
I was going to ask, is there transfer money in basketball with the club?
But it depends of each player's contract, right? So whatever new contract says, that's the buyout if you leave before your contract is over, which a lot of times teams will do. They'll quote unquote sell the player before his contract is up so that they can recuperate some of that buyout. And that's the point, right? A lot of teams actually lean heavily on that. They'll develop players and then they'll receive a nice compensation when they're good enough to leave, right? And that's how they stay alive as clubs.
Yeah. Was that the case with Luka? Like, how much did he develop in Slovenia before he went to Spain?
Not so much in Slovenia. I think he went to Spain very early when he was 13, 14 years old. So He was there very early. He went through the Real Madrid ranks, but he was so good so early on that he already got a chance to play at the EuroLeague level. And he actually delivered. Like, he played well, became one of the best players, if not the best player that year, won EuroLeague title, and was one of the best players in Europe at the time already.
It's still crazy to me that he was the third pick in the draft. Like, when you think about what he had accomplished already as a player, and you're going to draft, or was he the third pick or was he the fifth pick and then traded
there you go.
for Trae Young, right? He was the fifth pick of that draft. I'm just looking at what he did and what I knew about EuroLeague and his size and everything else. And I'm like, there is nobody in this draft who has done what he has done to this point. And it's not like he's a 25-year-old coming over. He's 18, 19, whatever he was at the time. I just thought it was, to me, that was the greatest indicator that whether it's and I probably put it on the NBA still, like there's still a distrust that great EuroLeague players can transition to the NBA. And I wonder for you, like, I think it's because they question, are they athletic enough to replicate it? But I
that's
wonder, do you agree, or what do you think?
no, I do agree. You know, there's obviously been some players who got picked and haven't done well. You know, I would say high in the draft, but none of those guys, at least not from the top of my head, has done what Luka has done, because he played, let's call it the second best league in the world by far. Very competitive, very physical, tough, tactical, and to not just play but to dominate in that kind of league. You can't compare that to any college
No.
team or college game or season, you know, for that matter. So yeah, maybe athleticism, sure, you can kind of argue that to a certain extent, but you know, I think the teams really dropped the ball on that one. And Luka was clear number one, and it's shown now, right? So, but yeah, I still think that time from time I see that people don't fully realize how competitive and how tough EuroLeague is. But also, guys that play in this league now, if they got a legit chance to play in the NBA, I think a lot of them would actually prove that they can definitely play in the NBA and deliver.
Yeah.
You know, some of the guys that play now in EuroLeague have done really well in the NBA. They just decided to come back because either they got a solid contract, because they want to stay closer to home, because they prefer living in Europe to the USA, because they prefer European basketball to the NBA, and so on and so on. But time and time again, you can see that, you know, there's players here that can definitely play in the NBA. It's just a matter sometimes of luck and fitting into the right team. And you know how it is, Rick.
Yep.
You play on one team, you don't get a chance to play. Then maybe you go with another, you get hurt. You know, you're out of the league very quickly. And once you're out, it's almost impossible or very difficult to come back in, because you have a certain stigma about you, and that's it. You know, it sticks.
Yep. No, it's you know, your greatest opportunity, and I don't know that every player realizes this, is in those first 2-3 years, because a team has invested a pick in you.
Yeah.
So they have every reason in the world to try to make it work. And then if it doesn't, and they let you go and they don't re-sign you, that does put a stigma. Like, the rest of the teams are like, okay, what's wrong with, like, what don't we know?
For sure.
They weren't willing to keep this guy because they know him better than we do, right?
Yeah, it's exactly like this. I mean, I can speak from my experience. You know, once that second season rolls by, like, you know, you're not a rookie anymore, and the clock starts ticking. Like, you're getting, I would say, even nervous as it goes. You know, like, where's my chance? Like, where's my opportunity to be in the rotation? Like, I need to show what I can do. And you know, soon enough, a lot of these players find themselves out of the league if they don't deliver early on. So it's really like, on one hand, excitement, hey, I got drafted, this and that. You know, you're in the league, but on the other, like, you have to start delivering, you know, immediately. And the higher the pick, the more pressure is on you, obviously.
Yeah. What, by the way, Vlade Divac was the GM of the Sacramento Kings, and I believe had the number 2 pick for Luka's draft. I would have thought, if anybody would understand what Luka had been, and he took Marvin Bagley, if I'm not mistaken, that seemed like a very American GM move to make. and I've never had the chance. I think I've run into Vlade a couple times since then, but we were never in a place where I could say, hey, can I ask you? Because I'm curious.
I ran into him a couple of times also over the years, and I also never asked him. I kind of felt uncomfortable asking that question.
Yeah.
And to be quite honest, and I don't want to say this for him or to defend him, because I really don't know, but I'm not really sure that he was the guy that was making the final. Maybe he was, you know, he made a final call, but like you said, it's very surprising that Luka wasn't the one that
wasn't
was
a Sacramento King.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, and it sort of leads me to one of the other questions that I had, because especially in this day and age, and I think it's probably changed since the time that you were in the NBA, ownership is more involved than ever before in selections. It's crazy. And the whole dynamic, the power structure of NBA teams is more owner, best player, then I guess GM, then coach, then the rest of the players. But the owner is far more involved, and the best player is far higher in the hierarchy than ever before. And I'm wondering in EuroLeague, what's the structure? What's the dynamic? What's the power pyramid?
I love this question. I was actually going to explain it myself. You didn't ask me, so I'm happy you brought it up. It's much different. It's much different. I mean, if we talk about number one, number two decision makers, is definitely GM or sports director, let's call it, and then coach.
Yeah.
Sometimes might be coach number one.
Yeah.
That's changing also, I think, in European basketball now, just because there's more and more money involved. So there's finances behind it. It's not like I just pick the players that I want as a coach, but you got to be a little bit conscious of what team can do and can do financially. But coaches are still, if you look at it overall, like main decision makers. Players rarely, or I would even call it never, get involved in these things.
Yeah.
Like they never get asked. Maybe after the player is signed, hey, you would think it's a good fit. Hey, make sure you guys, can play good together. We'll talk tactics later on. But they usually don't get consulted when it comes to that. Owners, not really.
Yeah.
So it's mainly GM slash coach or GM and coach that make these decisions.
Yeah, you can see that. I think it's one of the reasons why when you see international players come to the NBA and they're made franchise players, like the team decides we're going to build around Giannis, we're going to build around Luka, we're going to build around Pau Gasol in Memphis, right? You don't see players either going and saying, well, you got to go get this guy, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm leaving if you don't give me X, Y, or Z, or getting coaches fired. Like I just don't think it's in the mindset of player. Giannis might be the first guy who's actually the international player who's sort of used his influence to make those changes. But I can't think of one prior to him that even ever considered doing it. It's like not in an international player's DNA.
Yeah, it's just, I think it has to do a lot with the basketball upbringing, and like I said before, I think that's changing in Europe as well. But all the players up until now basically were grew up in this environment where you as a player, you don't have a say in these things, and doesn't necessarily have to be in a negative way. It's just like, you're a player and you're here to play. We need to develop you. You focus on playing. Anything that is front office work is front office work, with coach included, let's say. But my generation of players, or even younger guys, like I know for a fact, they don't get involved in these things at all. They might talk with other players in the locker room about certain player that the team might bring in,
right?
But they're not going to be knocking on the front office personnel's door saying, hey, you shouldn't sign this player, or you should sign that player, or coach should get fired, et cetera, et cetera. It's just not how we think and how we work in the professional basketball environment. So for a lot of these guys, that's very new when you come to the NBA, and then all of a sudden everybody's almost expecting you nowadays to get the coach fired or bring in another buddy of yours who plays on a different team. So it'll be interesting to see if that changes in the future.
Are there situations in EuroLeague though where you can tell there's friction between a particular top player and a coach? Like, does that happen?
Sure. I mean, it happens, but not so common. It's very rare.
Yeah.
And I think if it does happen, a lot of times players won't show it in front of fans, in front of media. It's something that is maybe, done in locker room or in practice where nobody's watching, and there's a, verbal, let's say, argument between a player and a coach. Rarely you see it between coach and the player. It happens, but mainly it's because of the frustration and because of lack of result. Players, I don't know of many examples that players would really publicly complain, hey, I need to play more, or I need a better team, or whatever, It's mainly comes from teams not performing, and that's when the frustration grows, because the pressure on some of these teams that I mentioned before, year after year, is just immense. I mean, everybody expects those teams to win constantly, right? So the pressure is definitely there.
Is there what about the media attention? Because immediately when you said like it's kept in the locker room or it's not shown to the fans, and I'm thinking, one of the problems with the NBA is the spotlight is always on the team, and there's media at every practice and going in and out of locker rooms. And I haven't spent enough time around European clubs to know like how prevalent, how present is the media, how much goes on where like the media by and large doesn't know. If it doesn't happen at a game, if it doesn't happen on the floor,
Yeah.
probably nobody's going to find out about it.
Yeah, I'd say the majority of things are kept away from media that happen behind closed doors. Like media in the NBA is amazing from that standpoint. Like how many things come out and how many informants you guys have or contacts or sources. It happens in Europe, it happens, but way less. And I kind of almost wish it would happen more, just
Huh.
because it draws attention, right?
Yeah.
It draws fans, there's stories created behind it. I don't think it's enough, but I think it's also understandable. I mean, first of all, basketball is not number one sport. Not an NBA also competes with other sports, but in Europe, as EuroLeague or basketball in general competes with soccer and some other
Sure.
sports. So media is mainly focused on other sports. On the other hand, you have different countries, right? So 10, depending on the season, 9, 10 different countries that compete in EuroLeague, and in Italy you might have Italian media, in Germany you have German media, and not always all these stories kind of come out or are just kind of kept local. Sure, nowadays with internet and all that, some things do come out, but it's still very local. And in addition to that, since I mentioned local media, I believe, and that's just my belief, that sometimes media protects clubs in that kind of way. Like they'll know about things, but they won't release them just because they don't want to hurt their team, right?
Oh yeah, they have a rooting interest.
Exactly, right.
Their team doing well.
For sure, right. So things will come out maybe from a rival team's media instead of your media, right? So it's that's like I said before. I almost wish it was more of that, and not just negative stories. I think there's positive stories that could be also discussed and being put out in the media. Nearly not as close as what you guys are reporting in the States. So hopefully that'll change.
I mean, ours has changed a lot, but because there used to be sort of an understanding of what you wrote about and didn't write about. Mm-hmm. And as a result, like we had more access. I mean, when I first started as a beat writer, we could watch, sometimes we were able to watch entire practices. And it was understood, like if two guys got into it or whatever, you weren't necessarily going to write about it the next day because that was going to make it bigger than it actually was. Mm-hmm. You're fighting for a rebound, somebody throws a bow, like you square off, like whatever. It's like, that's just part of it. If I write about it in the next day's paper, then it's going to become something bigger than it was. And there was sort of this unwritten understanding that you had a feel for what was necessary or unnecessary. And my guiding light, and whether it was in practice or whether it was, I heard about a guy doing something off the court that was out of bounds, my rule always was, if it impacts them on the floor when they play, then it's fair game. Mm-hmm. Then it's I need to tell the fans, I need to tell the public to explain why you're seeing what you're seeing if I know that there's a reason behind it, and whatever. And so
no, but I think that's a great point, and I think in Europe, and I don't want to be too negative towards media because at the end media is super important for the popularity of the sport, but too many times in Europe we see rumors, but not confirmed sources, not confirmed people who would come out. It's like a rumor that in that team something happened, or a rumor that team offered a contract to a certain player, right? It's a lot of it is like based on rumors, which I don't think fans fully appreciate. Like some fans will jump on it and it's clickbait and so on and so on. But if it doesn't materialize sooner or later, you're kind of like this league is all about, rumors and nothing really materializes. So I kind of miss that reporting, like you mentioned, like, there are like facts and there are like, people who you trust when they're reporting, like, that's for sure what's going to happen or happened. So that's kind of missing in Europe, I think.
A big part of that with us now is with social media and the internet. Like anybody can report anything. And if you are mainstream or an established outlet or reporter or writer or whatever, you're almost compelled to have to address the rumor. And then it gives the rumor legitimacy just because you're talking about it. Even if you're saying there's no truth to it, there's going to be at least a certain faction of the audience that's going to go, oh, he's just saying that, or maybe he doesn't know, or whatever it might be. And then sometimes it's not true. And I've ran into this before. Like, it's not true at the time where you go, it's not true. And then it evolves later and somebody will say, oh, well, see, you didn't know. And it's like, no. When I said it wasn't true, it wasn't true. Like that kind of, and now it's become crazy. Like, I know sometimes teams throw stuff out there just to see what the public reaction is. Right. And then like the public reaction is good. Then they actually consider doing it. I mean, it's become the wild, wild west when it comes to that.
Yeah.
I'm curious when it comes to the clubs. I think this is one other element that people may not be aware of, which is that the clubs in Europe, they're usually multi-sport clubs, and a lot of the clubs, a lot of the revenue is generated by soccer, and that funds everything, right? Or that's the driving force.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that majority of teams are let's say organized like this or constructed like this, but there's definitely some teams that are super important for the league. As I mentioned before, the FC Barcelona or Real Madrid, like they're closely connected to soccer, or football.
Bayern
like we
Munich
call it.
too, right?
Bayern Munich as well. I think their setup is still a little bit different. They're a little bit more separated, but let's say their name is connected, and they are, as an institution, also a soccer, soccer dominant institution, if you want to call it like this. But I mean, there's more. But the issue a lot of times is that soccer, like you mentioned before, the soccer revenues, the soccer income will drive basically basketball, and that's a little bit of a knock on basketball as well, that it never completely was able to get fully separated from soccer, and is still here and there dependent on the soccer money to be able to sign players and to be able to compete and so on and so on. And I think we're seeing more of a division between these two sports in recent years, and hopefully that continues, because basketball as such needs to become more independent in that way.
Is that because basketball is generating more revenue?
Yeah, but there's also spending a lot. Like a lot of money is being spent on players, teams, just to compete, just to be near the top or to win. There's some certain things that are being done, specifically in EuroLeague, on how to mitigate that and how to better control spending. But yeah, I think overall you still see these situations where a lot of income that comes in, whether it's from soccer, whether it's from an owner, whether it's from ticketing, sales, whatever it is, like it will get spent almost in the same season, all of it, just because a lot of teams, as I mentioned a couple of times already, just want to be near the top and want to compete. And that's the main difference, I think, between US sport and European sport, specifically basketball, is, in the NBA, you have these cycles, right? Where, for example, a team that wins championships, then maybe a player retires or somebody gets traded, and then the team falls apart, and then you're bad for a couple of years, and you go into the rebuild mode, and you draft players, and maybe in the next 5, 6, 7 years you come back near the top. So it's these cycles that teams go through. In Europe, you don't see that. In Europe, you have teams that are constantly trying to win. There's no draft. Nobody's thinking about cycles. Everybody's
there's no salary cap.
There's no salary cap. That's correct, and that's changing in EuroLeague, which is their financial fair play is adding certain elements of a salary cap, like I mentioned before, to try to control the spending better, to make the league more sustainable in the long run, to build up the finances of the teams, which on one hand makes a lot of sense. On the other, especially me for my position, I don't want to see players being underpaid. If anything, I want players to continue to make as much money as they possibly can, like they did. So it's kind of like a give and take thing. But yeah, the difference is, teams in the NBA go through these cycles, right? In Europe, you don't have that. You have teams that are constantly at the top, whether it's Panathinaikos, Olympiacos, Real Madrid, Fenerbahce, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, these teams want to win. And that's why you don't see a lot of patience when it comes to coaches. I think I don't know the exact number, but in the last few years, like, an extremely high number of coaches get fired in EuroLeague. Like, you don't deliver, you're gone. There's no really like a rebuild situation that would say, hey, we're not good now, But if we work in the right way, in 3-4 years, we'll be going to the Final Four.
Right.
No.
Nobody's hearing that.
You don't get that as a coach,
Yeah.
right? And I kind of wish that was the case, because a lot of times when I talk to players, like, they really want stability. They want stable programs. They want to be in a certain city, a certain team, building something. But too many times, 2 seasons go by, you're not a winning team. Like, that team will most likely get torn apart. Coaching change will happen, and you start over. So I would even call it, maybe at the maximum, 2-year cycles. If you're not winning, that's the most you get.
Is there any kind of revenue sharing? And by the way, for those who may not know, Bostjan is the director of the EuroLeague Players Union, and helped create it. There was no such thing prior to Boki coming along. You just took a little trip for work.
Yeah.
Where did you go? I want people to understand, like, what it's like to try to be part of EuroLeague.
I mean, yeah, first of all, in a 5-day span or so, I was in Barcelona first for General Assembly meetings, then flew to Rome for World Players Association meetings, which is basically the association that brings together all different kinds of player association, including NBPA leadership, let's say.
Was Andre there?
No, he was not. He was not.
Andre.
Yeah. But MLB had their representatives, NHL, NFL, and so on and so on. So a lot of North American sports will come in as well, and there's like a big conference. But anyways, from then I flew to Munich, did a team meeting there. From there I flew to Lyon to meet the Asvel players, and then I came home. And in a couple of days I'm flying to Dubai to visit the teams that are the team that is a new team in the EuroLeague that is actually joined in. So. The fall is the start of the season is a nightmare for me, because
and just travel. For people to understand, because geographically, it's not that different than flying around the United States to various places, right? It's more the cultural shift that you're going through. How would you compare, like, when you were traveling with an NBA team and made all those, you probably visit like 3 cities in a week or whatever, right? How does it compare to what you did last week?
I mean, on one hand, it's the same. Like, as a player, you'll travel from arena to arena, and EuroLeague team schedule is going to be as busy as it ever was this year. 20 teams competing, so 2 more teams added compared to last year, or 2 more spots, let's say, added, but you play a lot of games in EuroLeague. You'll play between 2 and 3 games per week as well nowadays, right? So it's a lot. The difference is, in the NBA, private flight everywhere you go, right? Private plane. You'll just bus to the plane. You'll just hop on and just go. In EuroLeague, that doesn't happen. Even though you might have a charter flight, like, you still have to go through the airport. You're going to a different country. You got to go through the terminal. And that's constant. That's number one, right? So the travel is not as comfortable. Hotels, I would say that they're getting better and better in EuroLeague. Maybe not 5 stars everywhere you go, but very good hotels as you travel. But I think the biggest difference is the arenas and the fans, because you're going to go in, for example, to Greece. There's going to be a very hostile environment with certain customs. Let's say that fans have certain chants, certain moments of the game. Then you'll fly to Turkey, full arena again, but still different. Then you go to, I don't know, to Spain, and it's different again. So you'll see all these different fans singing different songs during the game, or putting up, having flares in some arenas where they still can sneak them in, or here and there something might fly over to the court and like a lighter or something, and the referee makes a mistake. But I think that's the biggest difference, because you go from culture to culture, right? You'll go from different speaking languages, countries that speak different languages, to different cultures, different religions. So, and that's like Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday. Like, you'll just see like 3 different countries in like 5-day span. And that's, I think, the biggest difference. Whereas in the NBA, all the arenas more or less kind of feel the same, right? I mean, they're different, but they kind of feel the same. So I think that's the major difference. You
said that the coaches are really, their livelihood is determined on winning. They need to win. Bottom line. It's not development. It's not anything else. When it comes to players, is it the same? Because I think of the NBA, and players winning is still important, but like getting their numbers or highlights or outside deals, like there's a lot of things pulling at a player to accomplish that are I don't want to say above and beyond winning, but they water down the importance of winning for the status of a player.
Yeah, that's where European basketball is a lot different. The season is shorter. That's number one. So even though between EuroLeague and domestic league, some teams are going to come up to 80, 90 games a season. In EuroLeague, for example, this year we have the most games we've seen in regular season, but they're going to be 38 games. And people will say, oh, that's easy, 38 games compared to 82. But ask any player, these 38 games feel like 100 because every game is super intense. It's like you play basically 38 playoff games, right? Yeah. And it's not just me saying that. Players will confirm this, as we speak to them in the future throughout this podcast and so on and so on. And I think that's the big difference. And players feel that, players understand that, and that, on one hand you have shorter contracts, you don't have a lot of 4 or 5 year deals. Players are mostly on 1-2 year contracts. Rarely you'll see a 3 or 4 year deal. Maybe a local player, a Greek player in Greece or Spanish player in Spain is going to sign a longer term deal. Otherwise, players are on basically 1 or 1+1 or 2 year contracts, which means you got to deliver. Like, you got to stay on top of your game if you want to continue to either stay on this team or to sign in EuroLeague in the future. Yeah. And that's what, in my opinion, brings out the best of players as well, because they're constantly on edge. There's no time to really relax. Like, you relax for a couple of games, you lose 3 games, coach might be on a hot seat, you fall out of the rotation, like fans might turn against you. You don't want that. So that's what makes it so special.
And when it comes to, so you talked about the club and the club structure. Mm-hmm. How much player development is there once players get to the top of the top team in a club? Because what I'm seeing in the NBA now, and I think it's a byproduct of players coming in so young, that there are more player development coaches on staffs now than there are assistant coaches, I think. And then the assistant coaches are probably doing skill work with guys as well.
I think teams will still dedicate time to development, especially with their younger players who they've already, let's say, dedicated 3-4 years of the club's time into them. And now it's close for, these players are getting close to play on the biggest stage. But, a lot of times also young players will not prefer to stay on the roster of a EuroLeague team if they know they're not going to play. They prefer to be so-called loaned to another team, whether it's in the same league or maybe in the lower league, where they will play and get a lot of minutes to play and to continue to develop.
Right.
And that coach and that team is not going to be so much under pressure. So I think overall teams, especially in EuroLeague, could do better job developing players. I think it's too much focus still on winning now. And I hope that changes, because I think ultimately that will also help the clubs to develop these guys that can, stay in their club, deliver and help this club win games, instead of what most of the teams do is go out in the market and basically buy already established players. So on one hand, I see teams that still do a good job developing. On the other, I think overall, if you look at it as a league, there's not enough. And that's why you see a lot of young players playing in other leagues, not EuroLeague. A lot of guys that that people see in the NBA are not necessarily players that played in EuroLeague. Very few are actually players that played in EuroLeague. They mostly got drafted out of other smaller teams, just because EuroLeague is so result-oriented that young players don't get a chance to play.
Interesting. But the flip side is those players are probably not as developed or as established as the players that you see in EuroLeague, right?
Correct.
Correct. You're drafting them on their potential, as opposed to what they've already done in EuroLeague, which I imagine is what again makes Luka such a unicorn.
Exactly.
And that
if you look at all these players,
and he did it in EuroLeague.
And again, I'm not trying to go down the list. You guys in the States all love the list. Who's number one? Who's number two? I'm not doing that, right? But I'll just throw out some names, right? So, for example, Luka, played in EuroLeague, but then you get Giannis, never played EuroLeague. You got Nikola Jokic, never played EuroLeague.
Yep.
I don't know, Porzingis never played EuroLeague, and so on and so on. And there's probably many more names that I could mention that are international players on the top that never simply played EuroLeague, a single EuroLeague game, just because they never made it to that level. And that's kind of like I mentioned before, like the patience is very thin. There's really almost no patience to develop players in the EuroLeague itself. And I think that's a minus for the league. I think that's bad. And I think that's why people complain that EuroLeague is a very old league, which is very true. Like a lot of players are basically the guys that didn't get drafted, didn't play in the NBA, stayed in Europe and eventually got a chance to play, or guys that did play in the NBA and come back at the later stage of their career, right? Still high-level players, high-level league, but that element of young players is missing. It's not many that get real chance to play.
How do you explain then with Nikola that would you say that he developed in the NBA? And if he did, like he developed in ways that very few NBA players do. Like it's his game is very skill IQ oriented. And I don't see a lot of that development with players in the NBA. If they have it when they get there, like a Jalen Brunson type.
Yeah,
they've spent 4 years in college and they've evolved their IQ. Did Nikola have it when he got there and just had to kind of figure out how it applied to the NBA, or how do you explain Nikola's evolution?
I think with Nikola, it's been that he had incredible feel for the game. Incredible feel. I think it stands from the beginning. I think it stands out. I mean, even if you would look some of his clips when he was younger, like the way he played, sure, he was a big, he was chubby, he moved slow, but his feel for the game was just incredible. I think it was just a matter whether he can improve enough with his athleticism and physical ability to be able to play an NBA game. And I think he's done that to a certain point, enough to where he can adjust the style of play to his game. So the Nuggets will play the way, kind of like the way it fits his style, right? So I think it would be a stretch if I said that Denver Nuggets developed his game.
Yeah.
I think he had that feel before. I'm sure they added some of the elements. They probably added conditioning. They added some of the things that he can do better now. I'm not sure about if he was a great shooter before, the way he can shoot threes now and can be a threat. I don't know. Possibly that he developed that. I mean, he definitely developed the range in the NBA.
Yeah.
But to say that he came to the NBA just as a talent that probably wouldn't make it, and then Denver Nuggets basically made him, I think is a complete overstatement. And you see this with a lot of players. First of all, I have to say that teams in a lot of these situations, NBA teams do an amazing job with recognizing talent and picking these players. But honestly, I think it has to do more with giving them the right chance to play and not so much with developing them so much, right? Yeah. I think their base for skill definitely comes from European basketball, from EuroLeague or other teams where they played, not maybe in the main team, but in their youth programs,
Yeah, and it's also, as you know, it's fit. It's going someplace where the roster, your teammates, the system that's run, like all of that, along with a coach who believes in you enough that's going to give you an opportunity to make a few mistakes and still get minutes.
Yeah, like totally. And that's what we spoke about before, right? When we said these cycles, right? It's so important that you don't just find the right fit of the team, but you also find the right timing on when you get to that certain team.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at, and just one of the examples, like Darko Milicic, who was drafted by the Pistons back in the day. I mean, he was really considered one of the amazing talents in European basketball because unlike Jokic, he had a pure physical strength, athleticism. Yeah. You would say this guy is going to fit into the NBA like a glove, because he was just dominating physically, right? But Pistons were chasing title. They had Rasheed Wallace and other Ben Wallace and other players already at 4 or 5 position. Didn't really need him. What happened, right? 1 year went by, 2 years went by, didn't develop properly, didn't make that last part to really get a chance to play. And he started to struggle, right? So that's, I think, an example of a player that didn't fit in the right moment of a team.
Yeah. He also came into a draft that was as loaded
Unbelievable.
as
Unbelievable.
any draft we've seen in the history of the NBA at the top with
Yeah, I fully agree.
Carmelo and
Fully
LeBron
agree.
and the rest. So yeah, there's that element too. So before I want to get to this, we promised that we would talk about this because there's also the Americans going
Mhm.
over and playing in EuroLeague, and I've always been curious about the kind of American player who excels overseas, um, and what it takes. Like what are the characteristics
Mhm.
of Americans who can go internationally and play to the point where in some cases they're given national citizenship so they can play for the national team.
Mhm. Mhm. I think you ended up mentioning a national team where it's, I think, a perfect way for me to start giving you that answer, which
Mm.
is the players that can integrate themselves into the team, into the club's atmosphere, into the city, into the country. Those guys stick in EuroLeague, and those guys get to play, and those guys get to carry teams.
And what do you mean by that? When like
Because the game,
sticking with the culture and the team and
yeah,
like how does a player demonstrate that?
yeah, because in European basketball, you can't just come in as a talented player and say, hey, give me the ball, I'll score 20, 25 points. And if we win, we win. If we lose, we lose. It doesn't work like this. Like, you have to really go an extra mile to fit into that atmosphere, because the club, for people who work in the club, for fans, is more than just a team. They identify with that entity, or with that team, or with those guys. Like, they want to see passion. They want to see that you care. They want to see that you understand the history and the
Hmm.
yeah, like I said before, the passion behind it. And I think
Mm.
players who have demonstrated that over the last 2 decades or 3 decades or whatever, like, they were able to, like you mentioned, not just stick around in EuroLeague, but also play for certain teams for an extended period of time, or got a citizenship to play for their national team. Which is kind of amazing if you think about it. And we can have this debate whether we like the fact that
Yeah.
national teams can pick a player and give him a passport and then he plays. I think that's a different discussion. We're talking more about the guys that really made the maximum of themselves, and those guys said in a lot of cases, and that's not me saying, that's them saying, like, they really appreciated they got this chance to play, because for them this is the real basketball. Like, this is how it should feel. And
Hmm.
so many times you hear that from American
Hmm.
players, and I think the guys that really get to experience that truly feel like this. I've seen that, and I
Yeah.
believe that it's so.
Because of that, the player that I'm most intrigued in watching this year, and I'm fault myself for not having done it last year when he first went over, is Jabari Parker.
Hmm.
Because from what I was told about him in NBA circles, I would have never thought he would be the kind of guy who could go to Europe. I mean, I figured he'd be there a month and he'd be
Yeah,
gone again,
yeah,
right? It
yeah,
just
yeah.
didn't fit with the description of him from how he conducted himself in the NBA. And sometimes I guess guys can wake up too and realize, hey, like if I want to play, but I don't know how familiar you are with where he is and what he's doing, but that's he some of the other guys it makes, like a Shane Larkin,
Hmm.
I get that. Or Jordan Lloyd,
Hmm.
right? I totally get their mindset
Yeah, yeah.
fit. I'll be interested to see what happens with Jabari.
Well, I mean, Jabari came into a very interesting situation. As a former, I would say, established NBA player. Had injuries and all this, but did well, right? He was not like a bust by no means, right? So a guy that was a big name, especially when he came to EuroLeague. Everybody was like Jabari Parker, but everybody like connected him with knee injuries and so on and so on. So
Hmm.
he came into FC Barcelona and had 2 really good years with that team. Like, really integrated, played well. I think he averaged something like 12 points a game, which in NBA terms would probably mean somewhere like 17, 18, longer game, more
Yep.
open,
Yep.
right? So played a big role for that team. And fans liked him. I think they felt that he was doing everything he can to help the team win. And now he goes to Belgrade Partizan, which is one of those crazy fan atmospheres, and a lot of people expect for him to actually elevate his game from last year to this year. He's still considered one of the guys that might actually make another jump, right? As far as his production, which is going to be interesting to see, because he's not the youngest guy anymore, but he can still play, and he's a high quality player. So, I think in one of the interviews after last season, or maybe it was after his first year, like he had tears in his eyes on how much that season meant to him in Barcelona, and that he's back, and he was able to get through it, and because he knew, I think he started to understand how difficult it is to play in EuroLeague and to stick in EuroLeague and to be appreciated by fans is just a different beast, and like I said before, guys that understand this early on and are humble enough, they have a shot. A lot of guys, you said before, a lot of guys are going to be here for a month or two, they'll be gone just because they can't change of who they are, and they don't fit.
Well, there's nothing I like more than a comeback story. So if Jabari, and what really resonates with me, and it's why, one of the many reasons why I wanted to do this podcast is just because what I'm seeing in EuroLeague and the international competition, it's raised to the level now where it's you probably want to say NBA is still above and beyond, but it's close. It's on the same street, and it's what I've always thought basketball should be about, which is winning matters. Like winning matters and playing together matters, and let's not get caught up in the statistics. One of the questions I was just curious. How much do we see analytics as being part of EuroLeague and European basketball? Because I can tell you from agents now, and I don't know if this was the case when you were in the league, but like GMs will now, if they need a spot, they got analytics to say we need a small forward who averages 11 points a game and 4.5 rebounds, and we're willing to pay $2.5 million a year for that. And they'll just go to agents and go, you got a guy like that? And if they go, well, we want 3.5 or 4 or whatever, or our guy can score 15. They're like, no, we're not looking for that. We're like, the numbers are what going to define who we signed.
I mean, I will say like this, luckily, and I understand the importance of analytics, but I will say luckily, I think international basketball analytics are still not taking over the way they are in the NBA. I think there's still a balance, or I would say even it's tilted towards the coach's feel and who should play and why and how. That could change in the future, but for now, I think
Let's
the players. I think the players appreciate the fact that in international basketball is still considered more of a basketball where you feel the game more than you look at the numbers.
100%.
I think that's
100%. I mean, honestly, to me, that's the way it should be, right? Like the chemistry. It's the beauty of basketball, I think, as a sport. More so than maybe even, I don't know, football. Having watched my son yesterday, like everybody's got to do their particular job. And if you do it well, then you come together, and you still need people that are pulling you together. But man, there's so many individual decisions being made by every player that if everybody's not pulling in the same direction, doesn't have the same thought in mind of how are we doing collectively, if there's any personal agendas that come into it, I think it undermines you.
Yeah, for sure. And don't get me wrong, I think there's definitely room for analytics in sports and team sports in particular. I think it carries a lot of importance, but I don't think it should be the last decision making factor, or the main factor when it comes to decisions. Whether it's choosing a player, whether it's choosing a play in the game. I think it's and I hope, like you said, that players, coaches, GMs for that matter, are still going to tilt towards the feel of the game and the experience they have as people, instead of just looking at the numbers and percentages and go by that. So, but yeah, in Europe you definitely see it a lot less than you do in the NBA.
Yeah. So when you're looking at I mentioned Jabari Parker for me. I'm wondering for you, when you look at American players, particularly some who I think have changed teams,
Hmm.
who interests you the most in seeing the impact that they might have or what they're going to do?
I think there's some usual suspects, if you want to call them like this. You mentioned one before, like Shane Larkin. Like he's an
Yep.
established player that has proven that can carry the team and can score 20, 30, even 40 points a night, and he's always dangerous when he steps on the floor. And I think we're going to see another really solid season from him. Another one like this is Mike James, who's a all-time leading scorer in the EuroLeague, but can still decide a game by his own, on his own. I mean, he'll take the matter in his own hands and win the game for you when it matters the most. Then you have Kendrick Nunn, last year's MVP. 2 years ago, Panathinaikos won. Last year, they made it to the Final Four, but Kendrick had an amazing year.
Yeah.
He's just been a force in Panathinaikos. I always liked Kevin Punter. He's been one of my favorite players to watch just because of his shooting and his skills, ability, and he's a guy that has proven to win games. So I mean, these are some of the guys that, let's say, are established players. But then you also have some of the newcomers in the game. Whether it's Trey Lyles, who's going to play in Real Madrid, the big team, and we'll see how quickly he adjusts. Taylor
Yeah.
Horton Tucker, who I'm sure the NBA fans know, right, from the Lakers times, and he's now with Fenerbahce. Just had a big game the other night. I think it was his first game, and already played extremely well. Or Lonnie Walker, who is with Maccabi Tel Aviv. He's not really a newcomer. Played in Žalgiris, which is a EuroLeague team, about a half a season last year, I believe, before going back to the NBA, and now he's back in EuroLeague, where he's going to be, playing the major role in Maccabi team. So maybe those are some of the newcomers that people will start tuning into more and following more. There's obviously a lot more players. I mean, the league is almost 1/3 American, right? So it's a lot of names, and it's good to see sometimes players who are not just established NBA guys, or that in certain moments of their career they got a chance to play, but some of the guys that either didn't get drafted or did get drafted but never really got to play, and then they come to Europe and they explode.
Yeah.
So and like you said before, fans always appreciate these stories of an underdog, a guy that didn't go well for him for a while, and then he gets a chance to play, and EuroLeague is full of that.
I just can't think of an honor. We can go back and forth, as you said, about being granted citizenship of a country in order to play for the national team. But from a player's perspective, I can't imagine anything more gratifying or a greater honor than to have a country willing to make you a citizen and to appreciate like what that means.
I agree, but I agree only under certain conditions. If I say it like this, I'll agree when a player actually plays in that country for a club and actually is, let's call it, integrated into the
Got you.
country culture, right?
Yeah.
Like Shane Larkin, like he played in Turkey for many years now, and him being part of the national team like made sense, right? Like he's one of their players, if you want to put it like that.
Yeah.
Whereas sometimes you have players who will play in EuroLeague and they'll get a passport from a country they may never maybe even been.
We've seen some of that, there's a money element.
Of course.
Right?
I mean, it's a money. It's also a passport. It can make you becoming a local player, so to say. So you don't have to take one of the spots as a foreigner, because different leagues will only allow certain spots of foreigners on the roster. So it will definitely help your career, whether financially or otherwise. But yeah, that's why I'm kind of like not fully on board when it comes to this.
It's the spirit with which it's given and received that makes a big difference.
Exactly.
All right. Look, we still have a lot of meat on this bone, Boki. There's still a lot for us to get into, but we're going to begin introducing some of the guests, some of the guys that we've talked about already, both from the NBA, overseas, Americans, international players, former NBA players who are internationals. All of that is going to be part of this ongoing podcast. But
Yeah.
in the meantime, appreciate getting a chance to do this again, and we will do it again next week.
Can't wait.